Hello, do you hear me? Cool. Okay, I'm here representing the Delft University of Technology, and I'm going to present you a little bit about DELFI-PQ, which was our first PocketQube. And I'm not going to go so much into the details of the satellite itself, but I'm going to focus more on what did we learn in this almost 1 year in space. Well, first, let's just meet DELFI-PQ. As I said, it's a 3P PocketQube. Well, you know the size very well, not so much I have to explain to everybody. Well, we launched together with a lot of other satellites in January this year. We were part of the Transporter 3 launch, so it was quite a fun ride. But, well, we are now in space. Come on. Nope. Why doesn't it? Okay, whoopa. Here we go. Okay. Well, just meet the satellite. You can see how it looked from the outside and actually how it looks from the inside. One of the important things that we're seeing over the years, well, we started this project in 2016 when we started thinking about it. In 2020, we had the satellite ready and it was about to be launched. So that's when development stopped. Well, you see the new satellites, density is a key issue. Everybody is packing more and more and more. You start to see connectors becoming a crazy problem because all these big connectors, a lot of pins, great, but they also occupy a lot of space. And space is key, way more than in CubeSats. So the structure, as you can see there, is very much dominated by electronics. There's no almost real structure in the satellite anymore. What we managed to fit, well, we still have quite some empty space. We topped at 14 boards, so actually the Hungarian team beat us in number of components, in integration. We're getting there, so we're coming up next time. But definitely integration is a key problem. We can fit a lot of stuff in a satellite. That's definitely important to keep in mind. Our payloads, well, the first important thing was the satellite itself, but we also feature some laser reflectors because one of our targets is measuring the position of the spacecraft very precisely in order to prove this is not really an hazard for other spacecrafts. We also featured what we call LNA. It's a low-frequency receiver which is targeted at signals between 500 kilohertz and 10 megahertz. This is a demonstrator for a radio astronomy project where they would be looking at basically the early days, just after the Big Bang, 380,000 years after that, where all the radiation now redshifted to that frequency range. Of course, around Earth you can't do much. There's too much noise. But at least we can use the noise to our advantage. We can use it to basically know how well our receiver works in order to do the next step. And the next step will definitely be something around the moon. Let's go, sorry, this way. Well, I showed you the satellite. That's not all, actually. There's a lot of stuff in there, but this is actually what we built over roughly 3 years. These are all the systems that have been built, and in the end, only just 14 boards ended up into the spacecraft. Well, we followed an approach which is very iterative. Of course, we are a university. Our goal is getting students involved. So we can't keep the development stuck for multiple years because one student will not be able to follow. We need to follow the academic curriculum. So systems have to be reasonably simple, reasonably small, that students can actually work from the beginning till the end. That's why we decided to iterate a lot. So most of the systems you see flying, they're actually the third iteration. Some of them actually the fourth iteration. So basically 4 students have been there. The first one building maybe a very small, very dirty prototype, then the next one getting a better version of it, and then improving and fixing the mistakes. This was a key approach that also potentially costed us longer time for development, but at least we could definitely prove that students could do this job and could learn from it, especially because they need to test stuff. They need to be able to really see the conclusion of the project, not just, oh, well, I designed the PCB, I have no idea if it works or not. This is not learning. They really need to turn it on, see smoke, hopefully not, but at least see that it works, and from there, figure out the problem. That's why the whole iteration process came. So, well, I didn't count actually how many PCBs we built, but definitely another key issue will be mass manufacturing. This is already a key issue for other spacecrafts or CubeSats in general. You don't produce one system, you produce 10 at least. That also gives you the opportunity. Well, this board doesn't work. Okay, put it aside, and then let's work on the one that actually works. That's where you save time. One of the key things is going towards, well, automatic production, as they did with cars. There is no operator fine-tuning each and every component in a car. Either it works or it doesn't. That's as simple as that. So at that point, if it doesn't work, I put it aside and I fix it later. But if you're only handcrafting one flight model, then, well, it's just not going to work. It's going to take you too much, and it's going to cost you too much. And that basically leads to the traditional space approach, where every payload is handcrafted one by one. It takes years to be put together. Well, I said a lot about iterative approach. Well, you can see our battery holder all the way on that side and our structure. There's basically students working on each and every single iteration. And typically, either it's part of their curriculum, so they only work 2 to 3 months on it, or it's part of their master thesis, so they go towards 6 to 8 months onto the project. That basically means maybe it's not 100% finished. Then you get the next iteration. So they, of course, start a little bit from scratch again, but then they can go a little bit farther than they went before. So that costs time, but at least it's the full learning experience that they can go through. You can see also the first prototypes all the way on the right. Well, our solar panels at a certain point were tested outside. So students could do the test themselves. Oh, actually, cloud coverage is changing the illumination, maybe not very quickly. Is my system coping with that? That's a key issue. In space, you will be tumbling. So that's a key issue. Is your MPPT, is your solar panel capable of tracking the fluctuations, or it's simply chasing a signal that never gets stationary and you never get power out of it? So this is a key thing that you need to look into. Well, I said students. Then, well, Karma came out, and that was 2020. It was a complicated year. It was the year we were supposed to integrate and deliver the spacecraft. And, well, as of March, as the moment we started really doing the integration, all of a sudden the lockdown started in the Netherlands. Decisions of the university were that students are not allowed on campus. Only staff members could partially be allowed. So what basically happened is that 3 staff members, these 3 lucky or unlucky guys you see at the bottom, were the only ones in the department. We were the only ones allowed in there in order to integrate the spacecraft. Well, did we know everything? No, actually, we flipped the problem around. We were not the developers. We were not the students that worked hard to design these systems. We were basically the monkeys that had to put it together. So at that point, we completely flipped the educational model where students were forced at home, actually on Teams, telling us, oh, wait, you need to torque that screw more, or wait, you need to move it the other way around, you need to turn it. And we have been basically their monkeys for almost 6 months. We were the ones integrating the spacecraft and had to listen to what they were teaching us in that sense. So that was also a very nice experience for them. Well, some of the work, well, happened at home. A lot of the software development was moved from home. We also got quite some not very standard help from other inhabitants of the house, but that was the development back in 2020. So our satellite back then was ready, almost ready. And well, we put it together. We integrate everything, and you can see all the way there how the structure looks like, more or less, how our stack looks like. We're finished. The satellite is completely integrated. We can test it. The first test is vibration. Everybody's familiar with that. Great. You put the satellite onto your test stand. You run the resonance search. You run all the random tests. You run the resonance search again, and it doesn't work. Well, actually, that was quite a moment because we were stressed. We had to finish. And the test was practically failing because the spacecraft changed completely its behavior. You can see in the graphs. Basically, the resonant frequencies went all over the place. Nothing remained the same. So we started trying to figure it out, also under pressure, by the way, as SpaceX was not very happy that these were the results, till we managed to actually explain the reason. Well, they expect a spacecraft, and a spacecraft has a structure. The structure is a piece of metal. It's a rigid piece of metal. find the piece of metal in that structure. Besides those rods, there's not much. So actually, your structure is the electronics. And electronics has never been designed to be rigid. Actually, go back to connectors. How are they designed? They are designed to be flexible because they need to cope with your system doing something weird. They shouldn't crack. And well, that was the point where we could explain finally, well, it's not going to be rigid. So it took quite a lot of work to actually explain it. But in the end, also the whole logic behind the test is completely different. Your satellite is not a rigid piece of metal. It is not. It is flexible. Did it survive? Yes. And at that point, we could basically go on and continue. So it was not easy, but in the end, it's one of the things you really need to pay attention to. Another interesting thing. Pocket cubes are small. They're actually rather small. Are you going to be able to route cables around? Yes, you can. But did you check the minimum bending radius of your cable? Did you check where can you route them? Did you check how things can go around? Can you fit your fingers in there? How can you route that? Well, that was quite a pain in the early days. So since we started doing this iteratively, we had put together the satellite maybe 20 times by the time we were integrating the flight model, and we were so fed up. No cables anymore. We're done with that. Actually, there is no cable around in the spacecraft. Everything goes through this stack vertically, as most of the CubeSats do. Plus, we have some dedicated connectors in between boards if we need specific signals or specific things to transfer. But yeah, there was something that actually couldn't fit. How do we attach to the solar panels? And well, it's lovely. You typically use wires, but you're going to coil your wires inside the spacecraft. So you need the wire long enough so you can pull them apart, unplug your connector, and then also push the wire in without having a hammer to actually push it all in and then fit. So all of a sudden we said, well, why don't we just get rid of them? That's why you can see those sort of sticks sticking out of our battery system, those three thingies on the edges. Everything is loaded with spring-loaded connectors. These connectors are nothing else than a piece of metal with a spring. There is no electric connection up to the point you close the spacecraft. Once the spacecraft is closed, then it works. There are some issues. Of course, the spacecraft is not a rigid structure. Now you know about it. So it's going to rattle around. It's going to move a little bit. Are these connectors, are they going to scratch the PCB? Actually, we figured out it's not that bad. As long as you follow the guidelines in, well, how much stroke you get, how much room you leave to the connector to move around, they almost don't scratch, even a regular PCB. Of course, for us, regular was always gold-plated, so it's maybe slightly fancier than the regular PCB, but in general, we actually, after the test, ran pictures and scans of the surface. There's not much. So in the end, we were fairly happy of the solution. Another thing is, if you start to connect a stack which has a fixed height, which depends on the different systems, to the solar panel, which has a fixed height and it doesn't depend on these systems, you might get mismatches. So placing connectors basically in the solar panel was complicated for us. Since students were doing the development, it was very hard over the next iteration to have a system which is 100% consistent. So systems moved a little bit around. This solution basically gives us, I think, 2 centimeters of play, and we simply picked 2 centimeters. It could have been 5. So in that sense, we completely decoupled the inside from the outside. Maybe it's a bit annoying to put it together because you have live pins, and that's probably the focus of the next iteration, how to protect better the system. But it's very easy to close. The solar panels close, tighten the screws, all of a sudden you have contact. We also have jigs such that we can do the integration not in the spacecraft, but in general, these connectors were extremely helpful. And yeah, no wires around. We don't need to care about them anymore. And that was a key point. Well, another thing that was very nice was, well, how do we deploy antennas? Antennas don't fit. We didn't want to have a music wire. We used rigid sticks. You can see, well, you don't see it, it's on the wrong side, but there are rigid sticks running on all the satellite sides, and we hold them close, such that also under vibrations, they don't rattle around, and there is no risk of touching the solar cells. But you need to deploy them. So at a certain point, traditional burn wire mechanism, great, works. Everybody has tested it. It's so easy, no problem. We can integrate the spacecraft. Well, let's do the final test. Of course, you want to do the final test. And it actually fails again. So, we need to launch. We need to be ready. We can't deploy the antennas. Well, it turns out, and now you see those very nice thermal images, one of the resistors, the one at the top, reached 160 degrees. The wire breaks typically between 120 and 140 degrees. So it is fairly easy to break them at that temperature by simply overheating resistors. But what if you don't have enough current? We tested everything. Everything works. Well, actually, if your satellite is a little bit colder, if your connectors have a slightly higher resistance or the edge of the resistance achievable because of their margins, if you happen to have made a mistake in your board, so you have a little bit of losses around your spacecraft, when it all comes together, you just don't have enough power. So actually, well, you can see our satellite also was patched at the very last moment because one of the antennas couldn't be deployed. So this is also very important. You need to test as you fly as you test, as people have already said, but you also need to be able to accommodate quick fixes. That's also one of the reasons why we kept the satellite very modular. It's maybe more of a sort of university or school approach. Every system is in its own board. Every system is completely independent from the rest. So at that point, upgrading one of them doesn't cause problems to the rest of the spacecraft. And this was key to us because there were students, 5, 6 students around, each and every one focusing on one system, and maybe not all of them synchronizing themselves on the tiniest details. But we couldn't just tolerate the fact that they couldn't fit anymore. So in that sense, the interface was a key aspect, making sure everything is independent and modular. And that helped us because we simply pulled out at the last moment this board. Well, it's a wire, we glued it, and we're good to go. So in that sense, this capability is also key for your mission. Well, what you see there also, we can detect every time the antenna is deployed, so we save a little bit of power. But also, as it was mentioned already, current is a problem, charge of the battery is a problem. You need to be sure that when you're deployed, which typically happens when you're actually rather cold, you have enough energy. Otherwise, you can't deploy and you're stuck forever. Or you need to be smart enough. I mean, your spacecraft will get hot, again, if you just wait 90 minutes. That's actually what happened for us. The spacecraft was rather cold at deployment, but if you wait 45 minutes, it goes into sunlight. The burn time goes from 1 or 2 seconds to 20, 25 seconds. That's a lot of energy you need to put to bring your resistance from minus 30 degrees, starting, to 160, or if you start at plus 30 degrees, that's 60 degrees less that you need to heat. That's a lot of energy less. So keep that in mind. Well, we're done. The satellite has passed all the tests. It's great. We're ready to go. Okay, we had 3 different integrations because of other problems. So we know ALBA since 2020. We did the first integration, then we did the second one, and then finally we did the third in October 21, if I remember correctly right now. Did it work great? Well, the deployer is great. There is no problem. But back then, we probably made a bit of a stupid choice that made our integration process complicated. A lot of people rely on switches sideways, hitting the rails. A lot of people also don't have springs to separate the different spacecrafts in the pod. There are actually proofs, there are article rounds of CubeSats that got stuck together. Basically because they both had a residual magnetic field, they were deployed next to each other, well, there's no way to get them apart. So we said, hey, we got the separation switch problem and we got the spring problem. Why don't we put them together? So we got these nice switches that you see there. Great. They don't have a great stroke, to be fair. So the stroke pushes in the direction of insertion into the pod. That's good, but it's practically not very ideal. Especially when there's multiple passengers in the pod, it gets complicated logistically to get one passenger in, one passenger out. If you take one passenger out, you remove the pressure. Actually, the satellite turns on. So we had to make sure the software wouldn't really start to deploy the antennas. Another thing, that I would strongly recommend you. You've seen it in almost all satellites now. Something which is either an apply before flight or a remove before flight. Basically, there's no way your satellite will turn on with that thing plugged or unplugged, depending on what you want. In our case, it's a remove. So we need to pull out those very ugly wires. If you pull them out, and there's 2 of them, the satellite will be enabled. So in that sense, during all operations, we plug them back. That helps you also because if you pull up the satellite from the stand, your separation switch might just open. And at that point, well, your satellite might start the deployment sequence and you're stuck because you need to refurbish it. So that is also another practical advice. Whoop, too much. Now, we got into the pod, we tested, we're great, we go, launch. January 13th, great. SpaceX has the live stream. We're launched, we're in space, we have been deployed. Where are we, actually? That's actually a scary problem. I heard it mentioned already before. Where are we? Well, this is actually a radar picture of the different objects, of course. It just shows you all these blue dots are the objects that have been separated. This picture was taken about 2 hours after launch, so 1 hour after deployment, roughly. Well, the big question is, who are we in there? And the answer is, I have no clue. The point is, there were 105 satellites. It took about a week to get 60 to 70 being located by radar. But it actually took almost 3 weeks to get all of them found by the radar. And that doesn't mean that we know who is who. That's the other problem. Now you need to match them. So in that sense, the big problem is, if you have a high-gain antenna, well, for the first day, the post-launch TLE or the pre-launch or post-launch TLE is good enough. But the TLE drifts quite quickly. For us, after a day, the TLE was useless. NORAD didn't have TLEs for about a week, and we had no clue who we were. So actually, we couldn't receive ourselves. It took 1 day. No, we were not received straight after the first pass over the Netherlands. We were not received after the second one. Oof, panic, panic. We are not there. Then all of a sudden, we kind of RF photobombed into another spectrum. This is a picture taken from SatNox. Somebody was looking for EADES, the Spanish PocketQube. They couldn't receive it. This was 7:30 in the morning. This was me on Twitter while preparing breakfast for the kids after a very annoying day when we were not received. And then looking, hey, this PocketQube is not there. Wait a minute, there is actually quite a wide band FFT in here. Ooh, what? Wait, this is the channel next to ours. Wait, what are those things? Actually, we were there. So that was a bit the eureka moment. And a couple of hours later, we could find ourselves, actually. But still, that was the first day. TLEs were reasonable, but after that, they were gone. There was just no way. So how to fix that? Well, similar approach that was already mentioned. There's a former colleague of us that now runs his own company, and that basically does that for a living. So you can analyze the spectrum, you can generate 2-line element sets. We can do it basically in real time. So he's just looking at our transmissions, and it's just overlaying the orbital parameters and calculating what the best values would fit. So once a day, come on, I always go, sorry. So basically, using the tiny antenna that is marked by the arrow there, we can receive broadband, the whole band. So we only see those spikes of our transmissions, which also is a little bit annoying. So maybe transmit a little bit more if you can. You can use them, fit your orbital elements, and generate a TLE. We got a new TLE once a day, recalculated. That worked perfectly. At a certain point, you basically can send them back to NORAD and get them to identify yourself quickly. Basically, we got identification within 5 days. How is it going? Well, we're actually very cold. The spacecraft is much colder than expected. We designed it to be hot, but it's actually cold. This is making operations quite messy. The battery is cold, which basically means it doesn't deliver power. Since it doesn't deliver power, we can't heat ourselves up. So that's basically, the satellite is still operational, but it's very hard. Sorry. one thing that I wanted to mention, well, the satellite is alive. It's operational. You basically can see it's being received. There is no degradation in space, but operations are very, very hard. It is rather cold, and this is part of what we're trying to do right now to fix it. And we can fix it in software. The other thing you need to pay attention to is that there's a truckload of other satellites around. So you're going to have a lot of collision messages, potential collision messages, conjunction messages to pay attention to. Sometimes they're mild, but actually sometimes they're like 80 meters away from you. So this is quite scary. So what are we going to do now? Well, we're working hard to upload a new software on the spacecraft. We rewrote completely, thanks to a group of students that made, as part of their education, the renewed software upload system. And we will try in the coming months to update the software. This will help us fix, or at least alleviate, some of the problems that we have with the low temperature, changing operations a little bit and changing the safeguards that we have. The spacecraft, as I said, is alive. Consumption on board didn't change by not even a milliamp. That's our resolution. We can't see any degradation so far. So it's great. Well, another thing that was touched already by others, protection. In space, you have a lot of single event effects. They will send your systems crazy. So you need to be able to detect that they don't operate nominally, power cycle them down, wait for them to be actually off completely, and turn them on again. So because of that, we have a system which has 3 actors: a microcontroller, which is software driven, a current limiter, which actually has a threshold, and an external watchdog. So there's 3 separate systems checking each other. That's very similar to a lot of other players. That gives us a little bit too many reboots right now, also because of the software issue we have. But in general, the system is rather stable, and we haven't seen issues so far. Well, that I already said. And basically, here I am. We basically managed to survive almost a year. There's a lot of people that contributed, and if you're very, very careful, you can see them there. And, well, great. For any question, please, go ahead.